my definition of a spiritually transformative experience, and I talk about it in all of my books for people who want more details, you're welcome to read all of my books, but is that it is an experience that as an impact, as an after effect on the person, tends to cause a definite spiritual awakening. And what I mean by a definite spiritual awakening is that their values, their beliefs get changed by the experience in a more spiritual direction, perhaps believing in a higher power when they didn't believe in a higher power before, perhaps believing in that we live on as souls after death if they didn't believe that before, perhaps believing that our purpose on earth is here to serve and to love when that was not part of their values before. So they become more altruistic, more spiritual, not necessarily more religious. I want to make that clear, that people's values after a spiritually transformative experience actually tend to become more all-inclusive, realizing that the diversity of spiritual paths and the diversity of ways to approach spiritual understanding. I also, for clarity, subcategorize and I make definitions for various subtypes of spiritually transformative experiences. Because spiritually transformative experiences, that's an umbrella term. So it's a big term that's going to include a lot of different types of experiences that all tend to transform people in a more spiritual direction and confirm our true spiritual nature. And the way that I categorize them is drawn very much from yoga. Because as I searched, all sorts of literature, all sorts of traditions, trying to understand what I was experiencing and what my patients were experiencing, and trying to find words, of vocabulary. I mean, as a doctor, diagnosis, we want an accurate diagnosis, an accurate label, an accurate description. Not that it's a disease, just in terms of understanding it. Like this hair color, we call it blonde. And so when someone says blonde, we know exactly what they mean. But when someone says, oh, I went out and then I felt expansive and then I could feel the presence of a higher power, like, what is that? Well, I provide words. That is a mystical experience. So the ways that I categorize STEs is very much derived on how yoga categorizes experiences, very well described in yoga. Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and many other teachers have provided excellent descriptions of these experiences of consciousness that happen as part of our spiritual awakenings. So one category of STEs are mystical experiences, which in yoga are called samadhis. And there can be many, many types of mystical experiences. I'm not going to go into the subtypes right now, but all of the mystical experiences all give you a direct, personal feeling, sensing of the reality, the existence, the merging with, the viewing. So a glimpse of the higher intelligent power, forces, beauty behind the universe, however we conceptualize in some different way. It can be visual, it can be hearing, it can be feeling, it can be experiential, but it's all relating to this incredible universal intelligence behind the universe. So those are mystical experiences. The second category, again, drawing from yoga, is the broad range of psychic and intuitive experiences, which in yoga are called siddhis, siddhis. And this would include things like out-of-body experiences, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, past life recall, all kinds of them, remote viewing, trans-dimensional experiences, which many UFO encounters are. These are all, I categorize them with the yogic model as various types of psychic intuitive experiences, which in yoga, it's understood that as our consciousness awakens, these are all capacities that are possible. The next category I include in spiritually transformative experiences, and your group will be interested in this, is the Kundalini awakening. Also, I call it spiritual energy awakening because it's described in virtually all the mystical traditions, but using different terms. They might call it Holy Spirit awakening, Chi quickening, Dumo fire, Shekinah, Holy wind. But I use the overview phrase, as your group does, of Kundalini awakening, because that's where it's described most vividly. And that Kundalini, or spiritual energy awakening, will most frequently and very often result in having mystical experiences, will result in starting to have psychic experiences. But see, those other experiences, they can happen without a Kundalini awakening as well. So that's why I put the Kundalini awakening in its own category. The next category of STEs is the near-death experience. Now, the near-death experience, that term, as you know, was coined by Dr. Raymond Moody, and there's been a lot of research in the United States on near-death experiences, a little bit in Europe as well, but in the UK. But it is so widely known as a term now that I felt I needed to include it as its own category. When in truth, what a near-death experience is that it's either a mystical experience and or a psychic intuitive experience, but it's when it happens. It happens that defines it. It happens at the time of death, when a person has died and is physically dead and then later resuscitated, or when they're close to death, facing death, maybe in a coma, or maybe they're in a car crash, they see the car coming towards them, they go into the near-death experience, so facing death, or facing imminent death or trauma. So these are the triggers for a near-death experience, and there are various types of near-death experience. But basically, a near-death experience in my mind, is a subtype of STE that happens to people when they're close to death or clinically dead, then resuscitated. Then there is the fifth type of spiritually transformative experience, and I group these together, which I call the other death-related STEs, okay? Because there's something really powerful around the moment of death. And so there have been a fair amount of research about these different phenomena around the time of a person's death. So I put that in a category of its own, just that's such a powerful time. But again, they are mystical or psychic experiences that happen close to the time of death, but they're not near-death experiences. So one type is the end-of-life experience, or nearing death experience, or bedside visions, terminal visions. There's all sorts of words for this, but these are spiritual and paranormal, so mystical and psychic experiences that happen to people who are actually dying. And it usually happens to people, it can be hours before they die, or even a few days before they die, or even starting a week or two before they die, but they die after that. So that is the end of life experiences. So that's one type of death-related STE. Another type of death, the other two types of death-related STEs happen when somebody else dies, when you're not the person who's dying, but you are emotionally close or physically close to somebody else who's dying. And one is what I call the death watch experience that happens at the actual moment that somebody else dies. And there's all sorts of things that can happen to you. If you're at the bedside, you could have a mystical vision, out-of-body experience, see them crossing over. All sorts of things can happen if you're at the bedside right at the moment when somebody dies. But they can also happen when you're on the other end of the planet, right at the moment that somebody else dies, getting a vision of them coming to you, etc. I describe these all in my book. The third category of subtype of death-related STEs is the after-death communication. So this is days or weeks or months or sometimes years after a person has passed away, that a living loved one has experiences of that person communicating from them, that person's spirit communicating from the other side. So that is, I think, number 5 in the categories, other death-related STEs. And then the last grouping that I include is the inspired creativities. And expired creativity is very much related, in my experience, often to Kundalini awakening. That some people with their Kundalini awakening go into powerful, inspired creativity. Gopi Krishna was a primary example of that. So for me, there's my definition of spiritually transformative experiences, the umbrella term, and the major subcategories.